All right, today we are cracking open a book that, let's be honest, people either swear by or are a little bit scared of. Is it a genius-level class in psychological influence, or is it a pretty cold-hearted guide to manipulation? Let's try and decode Robert Greene's The Art of Seduction.
So this book dropped back in 2001. It's from Robert Greene, who you probably know from his mega bestseller, The 48 Laws of Power. And he kind of does the same thing here. He takes this strategic, almost military-like way of thinking and applies it to something you'd think was totally unpredictable: human attraction. And this quote? Man, it just nails the entire idea of the book. Greene is basically arguing that seduction isn't really about romance at all. He sees it as the highest, most subtle form of power, something that takes way more strategic thinking than leading a whole army into battle.
Yeah, don't get it twisted. For Greene, this has almost nothing to do with love. Seduction is the ultimate form of psychological power. I mean, think about it. In a world where you can't just use brute force to get what you want, seduction is how you influence people. It's how you get them to do what you want because they actually believe it's their own idea, their own desire.
Greene actually traces this whole art form back to its roots, and he sees it as a weapon for people who didn't have traditional power. He argues it was really perfected by women in ancient times, figures like Cleopatra. In a world completely dominated by men's physical strength, they learned to use pleasure and psychology to control the very men who thought they were in charge.
So how do you actually do this? How do you become a seducer in Greene's world? Well, he lays out a really clear two-part blueprint. And you should think of it less like a fuzzy self-help guide and way more like a tactical manual for a very, very high-stakes game.
It all starts with you. First, you have to understand yourself and identify what Greene calls your seductive character. Only after you've done that can you move on to part 2, mastering the 24 steps of the seductive process. So first you know yourself, then you learn the game.
Okay, let's dive into that first part, the characters. Now here's Greene's kind of radical idea. He believes anyone can be a seducer just by finding a quality they already have and turning up the volume on it. He boils these down into 9 basic archetypes.
So you've got these different types, right? There's the siren, who basically is pure fantasy, or the rake, who represents forbidden pleasure. Each one of these taps into a really deep, fundamental human desire. The key, according to Greene, isn't to pretend to be someone you're not. It's to figure out which one of these you already kinda are, and then just amplify it.
To really see how this all works in practice, let's zoom in on one of Greene's most powerful and, honestly, most famous archetypes, the siren.
Now, the siren in Greene's world isn't just about being beautiful. No, she is the ultimate fantasy of pure escape. She represents a total break from the boredom, the rules, the limitations of everyday life. The promise is pure, heightened pleasure, and a big part of the allure is that she's just a little bit dangerous.
And Greene's #1 example is, of course, Cleopatra. She didn't just walk into a room and rely on her looks. No way. She used spectacle, theater, this whole goddess-like vibe to completely enchant the most powerful men of her day, like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. I mean, she famously had herself delivered to Caesar rolled up in a carpet. Talk about making a dramatic entrance.
But it wasn't just the big theatrical stuff. As this quote from Plutarch shows, one of the siren's most powerful weapons is her voice. He said Cleopatra's voice was like a musical instrument, like a spell all on its own. And for Greene, this is so important. It's a physical thing that hits a person on a primal level, completely bypassing their logical brain.
Okay, so let's jump forward to a more modern example from the book, Marilyn Monroe. Greene holds her up as a perfect 20th century siren. Her power, he says, came from this really carefully built persona, this incredible mix of obvious over-the-top sexuality and this vulnerable, almost childlike innocence.
And this quote just gets to the heart of what Greene saw as Monroe's genius. Her seductive power felt unconscious, totally natural, like she wasn't even trying. And it was that lack of effort that was so powerful. It made men feel this incredible urge to protect her, all while she was the one actually pulling the strings.
So, let's say you've figured out your seductive character. What's next? Well, that brings us to the second half of the book, the process. This is the playbook. This is where it gets tactical, broken down into 24 very deliberate steps, all split across 4 phases.
And you just have to look at the language here. It is so provocative, and that's on purpose. Phase 1 starts with, and I'm quoting, choose the right victim. That's Greene's word for your target. Then you lead them astray by doing things like using the demonic power of words.
And it just escalates from there, all the way to the precipice, and finally, the kill, which is his metaphor for making them completely surrender to you emotionally. It's methodical, it's calculating, and it's pretty chilling.
So, when you strip away all the historical examples and the provocative language, what is the art of seduction really about? Is it some kind of magic? Is it about romance? Well, according to Green, it's neither of those things. At the end of the day, Green's biggest argument is this: seduction is not magic. It's a skill. It's a game of pure psychology, and it requires a ton of effort, a ton of strategy, and an intense focus on the other person. Your job is to create an illusion, a fantasy, that's so powerful and so compelling that your target is desperate for it to be real.
And that leaves us right back where we started, with that big, unsettling question at the heart of this whole book. Is this a sophisticated art of power, a masterful way to persuade people, or is it just a cold-blooded playbook for manipulation? Robert Greene gives you all